Abdul Kur Bazun Tafatat, Wadana Ben Mahu Hadis Aisha Inakalu, Anuki Fiena Aisha Shukalu, Wakul Aishukalu, Na Atapuna Pikalu, Anuki Feragun Shukalu, Wakalu Kalu Feragun Shuni, Anuki Wahid Kakalu, Wakalu Kalu Wahid Mahali, Nuk Aikilu, NG, Kama Feragun Shukalu, Hubkama Feridu, Nuk Aikilu, Ahuenu, Kudi, Nuka Fizikalu, Kama Tawukamata Fabi Kaluni, Amidi Fikalu. Anuki Kaba Hawahid, Kalu Kalu Nanuki, Kalu Yaku, Nukaiki, Kalu Babu Nukati. Begin our prayers, thinkings, and deeds with hope, divine love and all. I am in the love of all and all others. We are all in all. I am a part of all and all is a part of me. I am one with all and all is one with me. I could succeed as a part of all and fail as an individual. I can be all I wish in all as long as my wish is to stay in all. I am never alone. All is I am. All can I can. All does I do. Who am I?
Own thing. Who am I?
The Sacred Wisdom of the Grand Hierophant Tehuti. Chapter 9. Istatar, Vibration. Nothing exists, everything moves, everything vibrates in the all, yet movement is not all. The great third Egyptian doctrine, the doctrine of vibration, embodies the truth that motion is manifest in everything in the universe, that nothing is at rest, that everything moves, vibrates, and circles. This Egyptian doctrine was recognized by some of the early Greek philosophers who embodied it in their systems and gave birth to all of their thought of movement. But then, for centuries, it was lost sight of by the thinkers outside of the Egyptian ranks. But in this century, physical science rediscovered the truth, and the 21st century scientific discoveries have added additional proof of the correctness and truth of this centuries-old Egyptian doctrine. The Egyptian teachings are that not only is everything in constant movement and vibration, but that differences between the various manifestations of the universal power are due entirely to the varying rate and mode of vibrations. Not only this, but that even the all in itself manifests a constant vibration of such an infinite degree of intensity and rapid motion that it may be practically considered as at rest. The teachers directing the attention of the students to the fact that even on the physical plane, a rapidly moving object, such as a revolving wheel, seems to be at rest. The teachings are to the effect that spirit is at one end of the pole of vibration, the other pole being certain extremely gross forms of matter. Between these two poles are millions upon millions of different rates and modes of vibration. Modern science has proven that all that we call matter and energy are but modes of vibratory motion, and some of the more advanced scientists are rapidly moving toward the positions of the spiritualists who hold that phenomena of mind are likewise modes of vibration or motion. Let us see what science has to say regarding the question of vibrations and matter and energy. In the first place, science teaches that all matter manifests in some degree. The vibrations arising from temperature or heat, be an object cold or hot, both being but degrees of the same things. It manifests certain heat vibrations, and in that sense is in motion and vibration. Then all particles of matter are in circular movement, from corpuscle to suns. The planets revolve around suns, and many of them turn on their axis. The suns move around greater central points, and these move around still greater, and so on, and infinitum. The molecules of which the particular kinds of matter are composed in a state of constant vibration and movement around each other and against each other. The molecules are composed of atoms, which likewise are in a state of constant movement and vibration. The atoms are composed of corpuscles, sometimes called electrons, ions, onto quarks and zeals, which also are in a state of rapid motion, revolving around each other, and which manifest at a very rapid state and mode of vibration. And so we see that all forms of matter manifest vibration in accordance with the Egyptian doctrine of vibration. And so it is with the various forms of energy. Science teaches that light, heat, magnetism, and electricity are but forms of vibratory motion connected in some way with and probably emanating from the ether. Science does now attempt to explain the nature of the phenomena known as cohesion, which is the doctrine of molecular attraction and chemical affinity, which is the doctrine of atomic attraction. Now they understand gravitation, which was the greatest mystery of the three, which is the doctrine of attraction by which every particle or mass of matter is bound to every other particle or mass. They found that the lightest atom, hydrogen, was itself not the smallest thing in existence, but it was composed of even smaller things called quarks, even smaller zeals or zeds. These three forms of energy are now understood by science. The writers incline to the opinion that these two are manifestations of some form of vibratory energy, a fact which the Egyptians have held and taught for ages past. The universal ether, which is postulated by science without its nature being understood clearly, is held by the Egyptians to be but a higher manifestation of that which is erroneously called matter. That is to say, matter at a higher degree of vibration, and is called by them the ethereal substance. The Egyptians teach that this ethereal substance is of extreme tenuity and elasticity, and pervades universal space, serving as a medium of transmission of waves of vibratory energy, such as heat, light, electricity, magnets, etc. The teachings are that the ethereal substance is a connecting link between the forms of vibratory energy known as matter on the one hand, and energy or force on the other, and also that it manifests a degree of vibration and rate and mode entirely its own. Scientists have offered the illustration of a rapidly moving wheel, top or cylinder, to show the effects of increasing rates of vibration. The illustration supposes a wheel, top, or revolving cylinder running at a low rate of speed. We will call this revolving thing the object in following out the illustration. Let us suppose the object is moving slowly. It may be seen readily, but no sound of its movement reaches the ear. The speed is gradually increased. In a few moments, its movement becomes so rapid that a deep growl or low note may be heard. Then, as the rate is increased, the note rises 1 in the musical scale. Then, the motion being still further increased, the next highest note is distinguished. Then, one after another, all the notes of the musical scale appear, rising higher and higher as the motion is increased. Finally, when the motions have reached a certain rate, the final note, perceptible to the human ears, is reached, and the shrill, piercing shriek dies away, and silence follows. No sound is heard from the revolving object, the rate of motion being so high that the human ear cannot register the vibrations. Then comes the perception of raising degrees of heat. Then after quite a time, the eye catches a glimpse of the object becoming a dull, dark reddish color. As the rate increases, the red becomes brighter. Then, as the speed is increased, the red melts into an orange. Then the orange melts into a yellow. Then follow, successfully, the shades of green, blue, indigo, and finally violet. As the rate of speed increases, then the violet shades away and all color disappear, the human eye not being able to register them. But there are invisible rays emanating from the revolving object, the rays that are used in photographing and other subtle rays of light. Then began to manifest the peculiar rays known as X-rays, etc. As the constitution of the object change, electricity and magnetism are emitted when the appropriate rate of vibration is attained. When the object reaches a certain rate of vibration, its molecules disintegrate and resolve themselves into original elements or atoms. Then the atoms, following the doctrine of vibration, are separated into the countless corpuscles of which they are composed, and finally, even the corpuscles disappear, and the object may be said to be composed of the ethereal substance quarks or zells. Science does not dare to follow the illustration further, but the Egyptians teach that if the vibrations be continually increased, the object will mount up the successive states of manifestation and would in turn manifest the various mental stages and then on spiritward until it would finally re-enter the all, which is absolute spirit with the power to create or grow matter out of itself. The object, however, would have ceased to be an object long before the stage of ethereal substance was reached. But otherwise, the illustration is correct, and as much as it shows the effect of constantly increased rates and modes of vibration. It must be remembered in the above illustration that at the stages at which the object throws off vibrations of light, heat, etc., it is not actually resolved into these forms of energy, which are much higher in the scale, but simply that it reaches a degree of vibration in which these forms of energy are liberated in a degree from the confining influences of its molecules, atoms, and corpuscles, as the case may be, just as heat escapes the flames. These forms of energy, although much higher in the scale than matter, are imprisoned and confined in the material combinations by reason of the energies manifesting through and using material forms, but thus becoming entangled and confined in their creations of material forms, which to an extent is true of all creations. The creating force becomes involved in its creation, fire to heat, water to wet, ice to cold. But the Egyptian teachings go much further than do those of modern science. They teach that all manifestation of thought, emotion, reason, will, or desire, or any mental state of condition are accompanied by vibrations, a portion of which are thrown off and which tend to affect the minds of other persons by induction. This is the doctrine which produces the phenomena of telepathy, mental influence, and other forms of the action and power of mind over matter, with which the general public is rapidly becoming acquainted owing to the wide dissemination of Egyptian mystery knowledge by the ancient Egyptian order and its teachers along these lines at this time. This is the new millennium teaching. Every thought, emotion, or mental state has its corresponding rate and mode of vibration, and by an effort of the will of the person or of other persons, these mental states may be reproduced, just as a musical tone may be reproduced by causing an instrument to vibrate at a certain rate, just as color may be reproduced in the same way. By a knowledge of the doctrine of vibration, as applied to mental phenomena, one may polarize his mind at any degree they wish, thus gaining a perfect control over their mental states, moods, etc. In the same way, they may affect the minds of others, producing the desired mental states in them. In short, they may be able to produce on the mental plane that which science produces on the physical plane, namely vibrations at will. This power, of course, may be acquired only by the proper instruction, exercises, practice, etc. The science being that of mental transmutation, one of the branches of the Egyptian art. A little reflection on what we have said will show the student that the doctrine of vibration underlies the wonderful phenomena of the power manifested by the Grand Hierophant and masters and adepts who are able to apparently set aside the laws of nature, but who, in reality, are simply using one law against another, one doctrine against others, and who accomplish their results by changing the vibrations of material objects or forms of energy, and thus perform what are commonly called miracles. As one of the old Egyptian writers has truly said, he who overstands the doctrine of vibration has grasped the scepter of power, Sakhem. Powers, rulership, chapter 10. Yashulet, polarity. Everything is dual. Everything has poles. Everything has its pair of opposites. Like and unlike are the same. Opposites are identical in nature, but different in degree. Extremes meet. All truths are but half-truths. All paradoxes may be reconciled. All twins come from a single seed. Both poles are in the same ground and all. There is no extreme. There is no end or beginning. You can't have a half-truth. It's the truth or not. The great fourth Egyptian doctrine, the doctrine of polarity, embodies the truth that all manifested things have two sides, two aspects, two poles, a pair of opposites, which manifold degrees between the two extremes. The old paradoxes, which have perplexed the mind of mortals, are explained by an overstanding of this doctrine. Mortals have always recognized something akin to this doctrine and has endeavored to express it by such sayings, maxims, and aphorisms as the following: everything is and isn't at the same time. All truths are but half-truths. Every truth is half false. There are two sides to everything. There is a reverse side to every shield. Yet none of this is true. The Egyptian teachings are to the effect that the difference between things seemingly diametrically opposed to each other is merely a matter of degree. It teaches that a pair of opposites may be reconciled in nature, but different in degree, and that the universal reconciliation of opposites is effected by recognition of this doctrine of polarity. The teachers claim that illustrations of this doctrine may be had on every hand and from an examination into the real nature of anything. They begin by showing that spirit and matter are but the two poles of the same thing, the intermediate planes being merely degrees of vibration. They show that the all and the many are the same, the difference being merely a matter of degree of mental manifestation. Thus, the law and laws are the two opposite poles of one thing. Likewise, doctrine and doctrines, infinite mind and finite mind. Then passing on to the physical plane, they illustrate the doctrine by showing that hot and cold are identical in nature, the differences being merely a matter of degrees. The thermometer shows many degrees of temperature, the lowest pole being called cold, and the highest hot. Between these two poles are many degrees of hot or cold. Call them either, and you are equally correct. The higher of 2 degrees is always warmer, while the lower is always colder. There is no absolute standard. All is a matter of degree. There is no place on a thermometer where heat ceases and coldness begins. It is all a matter of higher or lower vibrations. The very terms high and low, which I am compelled to use, are but poles of the same thing. The terms are relative. So with east and west. Travel around the world is an eastward direction, and you reach a point which is called west at your starting point, and you return from that westward point. Travel far enough north, and you will find yourself traveling south, or vice versa. Love and hate are poles of the same thing. With many degrees of emotions between them, the musical scale is the same starting with C. You move upward until you reach another C, and so on. The differences between the two ends of the board being the same, with many degrees being the two extremes. The scale of color is the same, higher and lower vibrations being the only difference between high violet and low red. Large and small are relative, as well as noise and quiet. Hard and soft follow the rule. Likewise, sharp and dull. Positive and negative are two poles of the same thing, with countless degrees between them. Good and bad are not absolute. We call one end of the scale good and the other bad, or one end good and the other evil, or God and the devil, jinn and angels, according to the use of the terms. A thing is less good than the thing higher in the scale. So you have your God is up in the heaven and the devil is down in hell. Here's where the big white lie of trickery comes in. Think, hell is full of fire, and fire is light. So light on white is evil and the devil. Also think, and if God is up in the sky beyond the stars, then he is in darkness, so black and dark is good. The trick has been played on you. It's all the reverse. The light is evil, the dark is good, but that less good thing in turn is more good than the thing next below it, and so on. The more or less being regulated by the position on the scale. Up is dark, down is light, hell's fire. And so, it is on the mental plane, love and hate are generally regarded as being things diametrically opposed to each other, entirely different and irreconcilable. But we apply the doctrine of polarity, we find that there is no such thing of absolute love or absolute hate, as distinguished from each other. The two are merely terms applied to the two poles of the same thing. Beginning at any point of the scale, we find more love or less hate as we ascend the scale, and more hate or less love as we descend. This being true no matter from what point, high or low, we may start. See the trick, love is up, hate is down, love is dark, hate is light. These are degrees of love and hate, and there is a middle point where like and dislike become so faint that it is difficult to distinguish between them. So light dislikes dark, thus your racism is born. Courage and fear come under the same rule. The pairs of opposites exist everywhere. Where you find one thing, you find its opposite. The two poles, integration will always happen. And it is this fact that enables the Egyptians to transmute one mental state into another, along the lines of polarization. Things belonging to different classes cannot be transmuted into each other, but things of the same class may be changed, that is, may have their polarity changed. Thus love never becomes east or west or red or violet, but it may and often does turn into hate, where black began to hate itself and becomes a form of white, but never true white. Black devils, and likewise hate, may be transformed into love by changing its polarity. Courage may be transmuted into fear and the reverse. Hard things may be rendered soft. Dull things become sharp. Hot things become cold, and so on. The transmutation always being between things of the same kind of different degrees. Take the case of a fearful mortal. By raising their mental vibrations along the line of fear-courage, they can be filled with the highest degree of courage and fearlessness. And likewise, the slothful mortal may change themselves into an active, energetic individual simply by polarizing along the lines of the desired quality. The student who is familiar with the processes by which the various schools of mental science, etc., produce changes in the mental states of those following their teachings may not readily understand the doctrine underlying many of these changes. When, however, the doctrine of polarity is once grasped, and it is seen that the mental changes are occasioned by a change of polarity and sliding along the same scale, the matter is more readily understood. The change is not in the nature of a transmutation of one thing into another thing entirely different, but is merely a change of degree in the same things, a vastly important difference. For instance, borrowing an analogy from the physical plane, it is impossible to change heat into sharpness, loudness, highness, etc. But heat may readily be transmuted into cold simply by lowering the vibrations. In the same way, hate and love are mutually transmutable, so are fear and courage. But fear cannot be transformed into love, nor can be transmuted into hate. The mental states belong to innumerable classes, each class of which has its opposite poles, along which transmutation is possible. The student will readily recognize that in the mental states, as well as in the phenomena of the physical plane, the two poles may be classified as positive and negative respectively. Thus, love is positive to hate, courage to fear, activity to non-activity, etc. And it will also be noticed that even to those unfamiliar with the doctrine of vibration, the positive poles seem to be of a higher degree than the negative and readily dominates it. So black dominates white in all things given the chance. The tendency of nature is in the direction of the dominant activity of the positive pole, blackness. In addition to the changing of the poles of one's own mental states by the operation of the art of polarization, the phenomena of mental influence and its manifold phases show us that the doctrine may be extended so as to embrace the phenomena of the influence of one mind over that of another, of which so much has been written and taught of late years. When it is understood that mental induction is possible, that is, that mental states may be produced by induction from others, then we can readily see how a certain rate of vibration or polarization of a certain mental state may be communicated to another person, and their polarity in that class of mental states thus changed. It is along this doctrine that results of many of the mental treatments are obtained. For instance, a person is blue, melancholy, and full of fear. A mental scientist, bringing his own mind up to the desired vibration by his trained will and thus obtaining the desired polarization in his own case, then produces a similar mental state in the other by induction. The result being that the vibrations toward the positive end of the scale instead toward the negative, and his fear and other negative emotions are transmuted to courage and similar positive mental states. A little study will show you that these mental changes are nearly all along the line of polarization, the change being one of degree rather than of kind. Knowledge of the existence of this great Egyptian doctrine will enable the student to better understand their own mental states and those of other people. They will see that these states are all matters of degree, and seeing this, they will be able to raise or lower the vibration at will to change their mental states instead of being their servant and slave. And by their knowledge, they will be able to raise or lower the vibration at will to change their mental poles and thus be master of their mental states instead of being their servant and slave. And by which knowledge, they will be able to aid their fellows intelligently and by the appropriate methods change the polarity when the same is desirable. We advise all students to familiarize themselves with this doctrine of polarity. For a correct understanding of the same, will throw out the idea that light is good and dark is bad. We see now why the Egyptians wore white to funerals. Black as night means in the heart of gold. Ib is heart, emotions. Afri, rhythm. Everything flows out and in. Everything has its tides. All things rise and fall. The pendulum swing manifests in everything. The measure of the swing to the right is the measure of the swing to the left. Rhythm compensates. The great fifth Egyptian doctrine, the doctrine of rhythm, embodies the truth that in everything there is manifested a measured motion, a to and from movement, a flow and inflow, a swing forward and backward, a pendulum-like movement, a tide like ebb and flow, a high tide and a low tide, between the two poles manifest on the physical, mental, or spiritual planes. The doctrine of rhythm is closely connected with the doctrine of polarity described in the preceding chapter. Rhythm manifests between the two poles established by the doctrine of polarity. This does not mean, however, that the pendulum of rhythm swings to the extreme poles, for this rarely happens. In fact, it is difficult to establish the extreme polar opposites in the majority of cases, but the swing is ever toward first one pole and then the other. There is always an action and reaction, an advance and retreat, a rising and sinking, manifested in all of the airs and phenomena of the universe: suns, worlds, mortal, animals, plants, minerals, forces, energy, mind, and matter. Yes, even spirit manifests this doctrine. The doctrine manifests in the creation and destruction of worlds, in the rise and fall of nations, in the life history of all things, and finally in the mental states of mortals. Beginning with the manifestations of spirit, of the all, it will be noticed that there is ever the outpouring and the indrawing, the outbreathing and inbreathing of shahru, breath, as the Nuwapians word it. Universes are created, reach their extreme low point of materiality, and then begin their upward swing. Suns spring into being, and then their height of power being reached. The process of retrogression begins, and after aeons they become dead masses of matter, awaiting another impulse which starts again, their inner energies into activity, and a new solar sun life cycle is begun under the lunar moon death cycle. And thus it is with all the worlds: they are born, grow, and die, only to be reborn. But the six ether beings, whose god is sin of the moon cycle, has finally come to an end, never to return again. And thus it is with all things of shape and form, like the heat level, the fire and the flame goes out. They swing from action to reaction, from birth to death, from activity to inactivity, and then back again. Thus it is with all living things: they are born, grow, and die, and they are reborn in other forms. So it is with all great movements, creeds, fashions, religions, governments, nations, and all else: birth, growth, maturity, decadence, death, and then new birth. The swing of the pendulum is ever in evidence. Night follows day and day night. The pendulum swings from summer to winter and then back again. The corpuscles, atoms, molecules, and all masses of matter swing around the circle of their nature. There is no such thing as absolute rest or a cessation from movement, and all movement partakes of rhythm. The doctrine is of universal application. It may be applied to all phases of human activity. There is always the rhythmic swing from one pole to another. The universal pendulum is ever in motion. The tides of life flow in and out according to law. The doctrine of rhythm is well understood by modern science and is considered a universal law as applied to material things. But the Egyptian carry the doctrine much further and know that its manifestations and influence extend to the mental activities of mortals, and that it accounts for the bewildering succession of moods, feelings, and other annoying and perplexing changes that we notice in ourselves. But the Egyptians, by studying the operations of this doctrine, have learned to escape some of its activities by transmutation. The Egyptian hierophants long since discovered that while the doctrine of rhythm was invariable and ever in evidence in mental phenomena, there still were two planes of its manifestations so far as mental phenomena are concerned. They discovered that there were two general planes of consciousness, the lower and the higher, the overstanding of which fact enabled them to rise to the higher plane and thus escape the swing of the rhythmic pendulum, which manifested on the lower plane. In other words, the swing of the pendulum occurred on the unconscious plane, and the consciousness was not affected. This they call the law of neutralization. Its operations consist in the raising of the ego above the vibrations of the unconscious plane of mental activity so that the negative swing of the pendulum is not manifested into consciousness, and therefore they are not affected. It is akin to rise above a thing and let it pass beneath you. The Egyptian hierophant or advanced student polarizes himself as the desired pole, and by a process akin to refusing to participate in the backward swing, or, if you prefer, a denial of its influence over him. He stands firm in his polarized position and allows the mental pendulum to swing back along the unconscious plane. All individuals who have attained any degree of self-mastery accomplish this more or less unknowingly, and by refusing to allow their moods and negative mental states to affect them, they apply the law of neutralization. The master, however, carries this to a much higher degree of proficiency, and by the use of his will, he attains a degree of poise and mental firmness almost impossible of belief on the part of those who allow themselves to be swung backward and forward by the mental pendulum of moods and feelings. The importance of this will be appreciated by any thinking person who realizes what creatures of moods, feelings, and emotion the majority of people are, and how little mastery of themselves they manifest. If you will stop and consider a moment, you will realize how much these swings of rhythm have affected you in your life, how a period of enthusiasm has been invariably followed by an opposite feeling and mood of depression. Likewise, your moods and periods of courage have been succeeded by equal moods of fear. And so it has ever been with the majority of persons. Tides of feeling have ever risen and fallen with them, but they have never suspected the cause or reason of the mental phenomena. An understanding of the workings of this doctrine will give one the key to the mastery of these rhythmic swings of feeling, and will enable them to know themselves better and to avoid being carried away by these inflows and outflows. The will is superior to the conscious manifestation of this doctrine. Although the doctrine itself can never be destroyed, we may escape its effects, but the doctrine operates nevertheless. The pendulum ever swings, although we may escape being carried along with it. There are other features of the operation of this doctrine of rhythm of which we wish to speak at this point. There comes into its operation that which is known as the law of compensation. One of the definitions or meaning of the word compensate is to counterbalance, which is the sense in which the Egyptians used the term. It is this law of compensation to which the sacred wisdom refers when it says, "The measure of the swing to the right is the measure of the swing to the left. Rhythm compensates." The law of compensation is the swing in one direction determines the swing in the opposite direction, or the opposite pole. The one balances or counterbalances the other. On the physical plane, we see many examples of the law. The pendulum of the clock swings a certain distance to the right, and then an equal distance to the left. The seasons balance each other in the same way. The tides follow the same law, and the same law is manifested in all of the phenomena of rhythm. The pendulum with a short swing in one direction has but a short swing in the other, while the long swing to the right invariably means the long swing to the left. An object hurled upon to a certain height has an equal distance to traverse on its return. The force with which a projectile is sent upward a mile is reproduced when the projectile returns to the earth on its return journey. The law is constant on the physical plane, as reference to the standard authorities will show you. But the Egyptians carry it still further. They teach that a mortal's mental states are subject to the same law. The mortal who enjoys keenly is subject to keen suffering, while they who feel but little pain is capable of feeling but little joy. The pig suffers but little mentally and enjoys but what little he is compensated. And on the other hand, there are other animals who enjoy keenly, but whose nervous organism and temperament cause them to suffer exquisite degrees of pain. And so it is with mortals. There are temperaments which permit of but low degrees of enjoyment and equally low degrees of suffering, while there are others which permit the most intense enjoyment but also the most intense suffering. The rule is that the capacity for pain and pleasure in each individual are balanced. The law of compensation is in full operation here. But the Egyptians go still further in this matter. They teach that before one is able to enjoy a certain degree of pleasure, they must swing as far, proportionately, toward the other pole of feeling. They hold, however, the negative is predestined to the positive in this matter. That is to say that in experiencing a certain degree of pleasure, it does not follow that he will have to pay up for it with a corresponding degree of pain. On the contrary, the pleasure is the rhythmic swing. According to the law of compensation, for a degree of pain previously experienced either in the present life or in a previous incarnation, this throws a new knowledge of the problem of pain. The Egyptians regard the chain of life as continuous and as forming a part of one life of the individual, so that in consequence the rhythmic swing is understood in this way, while it would be without meaning unless the truth of reincarnation is admitted. But the Egyptians claim that the Hierophant or advanced student is able, to a great degree, to escape the swing toward pain by the process of neutralization before mentioned. By rising on the higher plane of the ego, much of the experience that comes to those dwelling on the lower plane is avoided and escaped. The law of compensation plays an important part in the lives of men and women. It will be noticed that one generally pays the price of anything they possess or lack. If they have one thing, they lack another. The balance is stuck. No one can keep their penny and have the bit of cake at the same time. Everything has its pleasant and unpleasant sides. The things that one gains are always paid for by the things that one loses. The rich possess much that poor lack, while the poor often possess things that are beyond the reach of the rich. The millionaire may have the inclination toward feasting and the wealth wherewith to secure all the dainties and luxuries of the table, while they lack the appetite to enjoy the same. They envy the appetite and digestion of the laborer who lacks the wealth and inclinations of the millionaire, and who gets more pleasure from their plain food than the millionaire could obtain, even if their appetite were not jaded, nor their digestion ruined. For the wants, habits, and inclinations differ, and so it is through life. The law of compensation is ever in operation, striving to balance and counterbalance, and always succeeding in time, even through several lives, may be required for the return swing of the pendulum of rhythm. Heptet, embrace, reality. Chapter 12 is Tadab, positation. Everything has its effect. Every effect has its cause. Everything happens according to law. Chance is but a name for law, not recognized. There are many planes of constatation, but nothing escapes the law. The great sixth Egyptian doctrine, the doctrine of cause and effect, embodies the truth that laws pervade the universe, that nothing happens by chance, that chance is merely a term indicating cause existing but not recognized or perceived, that phenomena is continuous without break or exception. The doctrine of cause and effect underlies all scientific thought, ancient and modern, and was enunciated by the Egyptian teachers in the earliest days. While many and varied disputes between the many schools of thought have since arisen, these disputes have been principally upon the details of the operations of the doctrine, and still more often upon the meaning of certain words. The underlying doctrine of cause and effect has been accepted as correct by practically all the thinkers of the world worthy of the name. To think otherwise would be to take the phenomena of the universe from the domain of law and order and to regulate it to the control of the imaginary something which men have called chance. A little consideration will show anyone that there is in reality no such thing as pure chance. The word chance is defined as follows: a supposed agent or mode of activity other than a force, law, or purpose. The operation or activity of such agent, the supposed effect of such an agent, a happening, fortuity, casualty, etc. But a little consideration will show you that there can be no such agent as chance. And the sense of something outside of law, something outside of cause and effect. How could there be a something acting in the phenomenal universe independent of the laws, order, and continuity of the latter? Such a something would be entirely independent of the orderly trend of the universe, and therefore superior to it. We can imagine nothing outside of the all being outside of the law, and that only because the all is the law in itself. There is no room in the universe for something outside of and independent of law. The existence of such a something would render all natural laws ineffective and would plunge the universe into chaotic disorder and lawlessness. A careful examination will show that we will call chance is merely an expression relating to obscure causes, causes that we cannot perceive, causes that we cannot understand. The word chance is derived from a word meaning to fall, as the falling of dice. The idea being the fall of the dice and many other happenings are merely a happening unrelated to any cause. And this is the sense in which the term is generally employed. But when the matter is closely examined, it is seen that there is no chance whatsoever about the fall of the dice. Every time a dice falls and displays a certain number, it obeys a law as infallible as that which governs the revolution of the planets around the sun. Back of the fall of the dice are causes, or chains of causes, running back and further than the mind can follow. The position of the die in the box, the amount of muscular energy expended in the throw, the condition of the table, etc., are all causes, the effect of which may be seen, but back of these seen causes, there are chains of unseen preceding causes, all of which had a bearing upon the number of the die which fell uppermost. If a die be cast a great number of times, it will be found that the numbers shown will be about equal. That is, there will be an equal number of 1 spot, 2 spot, etc. coming uppermost. Toss a penny in the air, and it may come down either heads or tails, but make a sufficient number of tosses, and the heads and tails will about even up. This is the operation of the law of average, but both the average and the single toss come under the law of cause and effect. And if we were able to examine into the preceding causes, it would be clearly seen that it was simply impossible for the die to fall other than it did under the same circumstances and at the same time. Given the same causes, the same results will follow. There is always a cause and a because to every event, or because. Nothing ever happens without a cause, or rather a chain of causes. Some confusion has arisen in the minds of persons considering the doctrine from the fact that they were unable to explain how one thing could cause another thing, that is, be the creator of the second thing. As a matter of fact, no thing ever causes or creates another thing. Cause and effect deals merely with events. An event is that which comes, arrives, or happens as a result or a consequence of some preceding event. No event creates another event, but is merely a preceding link in the great orderly chain of events flowing from the creative energy of the all. There is a continuity between all events, precedent, consequent, and subsequent. There is a relation existing between everything that follows. A stone is dislodged from a mountainside and crashes through a roof of a cottage in the valley below. At first sight, we regard this as a chance effect, but when we examine the matter, we find a great chain of causes behind it. In the first place, there was the rain, which softened the earth, supporting the stone, and which allowed it to fall. And then back of what was the influence of the sun, other rains, etc., which gradually disintegrated the piece of the rock from a larger piece. Then there were the causes which led to the formation of the mountain and its upheaval by convulsions of nature, and so on ad infinitum. Then we might follow up the causes behind the rain, etc. Then we might consider the existence of the roof. In short, we could soon find ourselves involved in a mesh of cause and effect, from which we will soon strive to extricate ourselves. Just as a mortal has 2 parents and 4 grandparents and 8 great-grandparents and 16 great-great-grandparents and so on until then. Say, 40 generations are calculated, the numbers of ancestors run into many millions, so it is with the number of causes behind even the most trifling event or phenomena, such as the passage of a tiny speck of soot before your eye. It is not an easy matter to trace the bit of soot back to the early period of the world's history when it formed a part of the massive tree trunk, which was afterward converted into a coal and so on, until as a speck of soot, it now passes before your vision onto its way to other adventures. A mighty chain of events, causes, and effects brought it to its present condition, and the latter is but one of the chain of events which will go to produce other events hundreds of years from now. One of the series of events arising from a tiny bit of soot from the writing of these lines, which caused the typesetter to perform certain work, the proofreader to do likewise, in which we arouse certain thoughts in your mind, and that of others, which in turn will affect others, and so on and on and on, beyond the ability of mortal to think further, and all from the passage of a tiny bit of soot, all of which shows the relativity and association of things, and the further fact that there is no great, there is no small, in the mind that causeth all. Stop to think a moment. If a certain mortal had not met a certain maid, away back in the dim period of time, pre-dynastic period in ancient Egypt, you who are now reading these lines would not now be here. And if perhaps the same couple had failed to meet, we who now write these lines would not now be here. And the very fact of writing on our part and the act of reading on yours will affect not only the respective lives of yourself and ourselves, but will also have a direct or indirect effect upon many other people now living and who will live in the ages to come. Every thought we think, every act we perform has its direct and indirect results, which fit into the great chain of cause and effect. We do not wish to enter into a consideration of free will or determinism in this work for various reasons. Among the many reasons is the doctrine one that neither side of the controversy is entirely right. In fact, both sides are partially right, according to the Egyptian teachings. The doctrine of polarity shows that both are but half-truths, the opposing poles of truth. The teachings are that a mortal may be both free and yet bound by necessity, depending upon the meaning of the terms, and the height of truth from which the matter is examined. The ancient writers express the matter thus: the further the creation is from the center, the more it is bound. The nearer the center it reaches, the nearer free is it. The majority of people are more or less the slaves of heredity, environment, and etc., and manifest very little freedom. They are swayed by the opinions, customs, and thoughts of the outside world, and also by their emotions, feelings, moods, etc. They manifest no mastery worthy of the name. They indignantly imputate this assertion, saying, "Why? I certainly am free to act and do as I please. I do just what I want to do." But they fail to explain whence arise the want to and as I please. What makes them want to do one thing in preference to another? What makes them please to do this and not to do that? Is there no because to their pleasing and wanting? The master can change the pleases and wants into others at the opposite end of the mental pole. They are able to will instead of to will because some feeling, mood, emotion, or environmental suggestion arouses a tendency or desire within him so to do. The majority of people are carried along like the falling stone, obedient to environment, outside influences, and internal moods, desires, etc., not to speak of the desires of wills of others stronger than themselves. Heredity, environment, and suggestion carrying them along without resistance on their part, or the exercise of the will. Moved like the pawns on the checkerboard of life, they play their parts and are laid aside after the game is over. But the masters, knowing the rules of the game, rise above the plane of material life and placing themselves in touch with the higher powers of their nature, dominate their own moods, characters, qualities, and polarity, as well as the environment surrounding them, and thus become movers in the game instead of pawns, causes instead of effects. The masters do not escape the causation of the higher planes, but fall in with the higher laws, and thus master circumstances on the lower plane. They thus form a conscious part of the law, instead of being mere blind instruments. While they serve on the higher planes, they rule on the material plane. But on higher and on lower, the law is always in operation. The blind deity has been abolished by reason. We are able to see now, with eyes made clear by right knowledge, that everything is governed by universal law, that the infinite number of laws are but manifestations of the one great law, the law which is the all. It is true indeed that not a sparrow drops unnoticed by the mind, the all, that even the 9 ether woollied hairs on our head are numbered as the Bible and Quran, and they both have birth dates. But what about before them? There is nothing outside of law, nothing that happens contrary to it, and yet do not make the mistake of supposing that mortal is but a blind. Far from that. The Egyptian teachings are that mortals may use law to overcome laws, and that the higher will always prevail against the lower until at last they have reached the stage in which they seek refuge in the law itself, and laughs the phenomenal laws to scorn. Are you able to grasp the inner meaning of this? Simma. Union. Reproduction. Chapter 13. Sawuth. Gender. Gender is in everything. Everything has its masculine and feminine doctrines. Gender manifests on all planes. The great seventh Egyptian doctrine, the doctrine of gender, embodies the truth that there is a gender manifested in everything. But the masculine and feminine doctrines are ever present and active in all phases of phenomena. on each and every plane of life. At this point, I think it well to call your attention to the fact that gender, in its Egyptian sense, and sex, in the ordinarily accepted use of the term, are not the same. The word gender is derived from the Latin root meaning to beget, to procreate, to generate, to create, to produce. A moment's consideration will show you that the word has a much broader and more meaning than the term sex. The latter referring to the physical distinctions between male and female living things. Sex is merely a manifestation of gender on a certain plane of the great physical plane, the plane of organic life. We wish to impress this distinction upon your minds for the reason that certain writers who have acquired a smattering of the Egyptian teaching have sought to intensify this seventh Egyptian doctrine with wild and fanciful and often reprehensible theories and teachings regarding sex. The office of gender is solely that of creating, producing, generating, etc., and its manifestations are visible on every plane of the phenomena. It is somewhat difficult to produce proofs of this along scientific lines for the reason that science has not as yet recognized this doctrine as of universal application. But still, some proofs are forthcoming from scientific sources. In the first place, we find a distinct manifestation of the doctrine of gender among the corpuscles, ions or electrons, the genes, DNAs, which constitute the basis of matter and flesh as science now knows the latter, and which by forming certain combinations form the atom, which until lately was regarded as final and indivisible. The latest word of science is that the atom is composed of a multitude of corpuscles, electrons, or ions, the various names being applied by different authorities, revolving around each other and vibrating at a high degree and intensity, quarks, zeds, or zels. But the accompanying statement is that the formation of the atom is really due to the clustering of negative corpuscles around a positive one, the positive corpuscles seeming to exert a certain influence upon the negative corpuscles, causing the latter to assume certain combinations and thus create or generate an atom or cell. This is in line with the most ancient Greek teachings, which have always identified the masculine doctrine of gender with the positive and the feminine with the negative poles of electricity, so-called. This is not so in Egypt, where both are negative and positive. Now a word at this point regarding this identification. The public mind has formed an entirely erroneous impression regarding the equalities of the so-called negative pole of electrified or magnetized matter. The terms positive and negative are very wrongly applied to this phenomenon by science. The word positive means something real and strong, as compared with a negative unreality or weakness. What do the Greeks say now? That scientists prove that women were first and is the strongest supreme being, and that the rib came from the woman to make the male, not vice versa, as your Bible and Quran misinformed you about. They are wrong. Allah is Alat, a woman. God is Goddess, truth. Nothing is further from the real facts of electrical phenomena. The so-called negative pole of the battery is really the pole in and by which the generation or production of new forms and energies is manifested. There is nothing negative about it. The best scientific authorities now use the word cathode in place of negative. The word cathode coming from the Greek root meaning descent, the path of generation, etc. From the cathode pole emerged the swarm of electrons or corpuscles. From the same pole emerged those wonderful rays which have revolutionized scientific conceptions during the past decade on up to the year 2000. The cathode pole is the mother of all of the strange phenomena which have rendered useless the old textbooks, Bible and Quran, and which have caused many long-accepted theories to be relegated to the scrap pile of scientific speculation. The cathode, or negative pole, is the source of doctrine of electrical phenomena and of the finest forms of matter as yet known to science. So you see, we are justified in refusing to use the term negative in our consideration of the subject and insisting upon substituting the word feminine for the old term. The facts of the cause bear us out in this, without taking the Egyptian teachings into consideration, and so we shall use the word feminine in the place of negative in speaking of the pole of activity. The latest scientific teachings are that the creative corpuscles or electrons are feminine. Science says they are composed of negative electricity. Yet that's not as bad as religion, which teaches it's good to break the earth in order to grow a tree. We say they are composed of feminine energy. A feminine corpuscle becomes detached from, or rather leaves, a masculine corpuscle and starts on a new career. It actively seeks a union with a masculine corpuscle, being urged thereto by the natural impulse to create new forms of matter or energy. One writer goes so far as to use the term it as one seeks, of his own volition, a union. The male needs the female more than the female needs the male. She is the mother of created things. This attachment and uniting form the basis of the greater part of the activities of the chemical world. When the feminine corpuscle unites with the masculine corpuscle, a certain process is begun. The feminine particles vibrate rapidly under the influence of the masculine energy and circle rapidly around the latter. The result is the birth of a new atom. This new atom is really composed of a union of the masculine and feminine electrons or corpuscles, but when the union is formed, the atom is a separate thing, having certain properties, but no longer manifesting the property of free electricity. The process of detachment or separation of the feminine electrons is called ionization. These electrons or corpuscles are the most active workers in nature's field. Arising from their unions or combination manifest the varied phenomena of light, heat, electricity, magnetism, attraction, repulsion, chemical affinity, and the reverse. And similar phenomena are all called chaos. And all this arises from the operation of the doctrine of gender on the plane of energy. The part of the masculine doctrine seems to be that of directing a certain inherent energy towards the feminine doctrine and thus starting into activity the creative processes which have already started in the female called ovulation. But the feminine doctrine is the one always doing the active creative work, the God being, and this is sun on all planes. And yet each doctrine is incapable of operative energy without the assistance of the other. After their separation in the very beginning, when divided into two daughter cells, not son cells, to become what we all are today. In some of the forms of life, the two doctrines are combined in one organism, and this is how humans are started. For the matter, everything in the organic world manifests both genders. There is always the masculine present in the feminine form. The Egyptian teachings include them regarding the operation of the two doctrines of gender in the production and manifestation of various forms of energy, etc. The female supreme being first is seen in the mitochondria DNA, but the example we have given you of the phenomena of the electrons or corpuscles will show you that science was on the right path and also gives you a general idea of the underlying doctrines. Some leading scientific investigators have announced their beliefs that in the formation of crystals, there was to be found something that corresponded to sex activity, which is another straw showing the direction the scientific winds are blowing. And each year will bring other facts to corroborate the correctness of the Egyptian doctrine of gender. It will be found that gender is in constant operation and manifestation in the field of inorganic matter and in the field of energy or force. Electricity is now generally regarded as the something into which all other forms of energy seem to melt or dissolve. The electrical doctrine of the universe is the latest scientific doctrine and is growing rapidly in popularity and general acceptance. And it thus follows that if we are able to discover in the phenomena of electricity, even at the very root and source of its manifestations, a clear and unmistakable evidence of the presence of gender and its activities, we are justified in asking you to accept that scientists has offered proofs of the existence and all universal phenomena of the great Egyptian doctrine, the doctrine of gender. It is not necessary to take up your time with the well-known phenomena of the attraction and repulsion of atoms, chemical affinity, the loves and hates of the atomic particles, the attraction or cohesion between the molecules of matter. These facts are too well known to need extended comment from us. But have you ever considered that all of these things are manifestations of the gender doctrine? Can you not see that the phenomena are on all fours with that of the corpuscles or electrons? And more than this, can you not see the resemblance of the Egyptian teachings which assert that the very law of gravitation, that strange attraction by reason of which all particles and bodies of matter in the universe tend toward each other, is but another manifestation of the doctrine of gender, which operate in the direction of attracting the masculine to the feminine, of a child to its mother, that man to wife. I have offered you scientific proof of this at this time. Examine the phenomena in the light of the Egyptian teachings on the subject and see for yourself. Submit all physical phenomena to the test, and you will discern the doctrine of gender, ever in evidence to this day. Men come from women, not vice versa. Let us now pass on to a consideration of the operation of the doctrine of the mental plane. Many interesting features are there awaiting examination. Shut or shoot. Feather. Order. Chapter 14. Growth and creation. To create or grow is part of change, cause, and effect. But what it becomes is under the law of creation, not growth. The great eighth doctrine of growth, creation, is the doctrine of growing, birth, made, fashioned by the use of genders, which, as I said, is derived from the Latin root, meaning to beget or begotten, to procreate, to generate or regenerate, to produce. Simple, to grow in the womb of one of the sexes of gender, namely the mother who controlled birth and what is born in her womb. She was first, regardless of what your Bible or Quran says. Women were before man, and the proof is in the mitochondria DNA. She decides the gender, and without her, we would all not be in the flesh. Flesh is not created by saying puff. It is grown as it goes through a 9-month in the womb of 3 stages of growth. The idea of creating does not come into play until reason, opinion, and decision are made. What that which is grown in the womb becomes after birth, when it begins to think for itself, what it likes, who it likes, where will it live, and with whom. What will it become, a bum or a successor? These are personal decisions which make you an individual. Then and only then is it safe to speak of creation or created. Now it unifies. That means something new happened. But even then, it's in the all, and the all is all. The Jinnah, wings, living. Chapter 15. Breathing. Everyone breathes. In fact, everything breathes, inhales and exhales in and out. The key to life and existence is in the word intake. The great ninth Egyptian doctrine, the doctrine of breath, intake and out, embodies the law of life. Is not day and night a form of breathing? And is not this a law on how all things work? Even the birth and death of stars are universes. and without this doctrine, things can't be. Movement is merely a term for life and breath or breathing, a sign of existence. Without this form of movement, there is no life. The doctrine of breath is cause and effect. All scientific thought and ancient and even modern beliefs have to acknowledge this law. Breathing not only sustains life, but can cure or be the means by which illness get into the human body. The three demons, germs, bacteria, and virus, were the devils of ancient Egypt. Sickness was a sign of demon possession, so breathing was a key to health or sickness, life or death. Yet the all create beings that need to breathe while in the body. But as the all return to all, the breathing stops, movement stops, as you know it from one point to the next. When all return to all, it will just be. No want, no will, no wish, no need, no me or you, him or her, yes or no, just all and all. Sistrum, rattle, sounds. Chapter 16. Mental gender. Both as one mental gender, male, female, and those caught in between the law of all things. If there be male and female, there must be she-male and he-female. That's the law and how things exist. If there is right and left, then there must be the middle. In all things, this realization is the key to all happiness for self and others. Mind has no gender, only body. Soul has no gender, only body. Spirit has no gender, only body. Emotions works with the body. Students of psychology and religion who have followed the modern trend of thought along the lines of mental phenomena are struck by the persistence of the dual mind idea, which has manifested itself so strongly during the past years. Evil devil minds, good God minds, and which has given rise to a number of plausible theories regarding the nature and constitution of these two minds. The objective and subjective minds, which they hold existed in every individual. Other writers have attracted almost equal attention by the theories regarding the conscious and subconscious minds, the voluntary and involuntary minds, the active and passive minds. The theories of the various writers differ from each other, but there remains the underlying doctrine and the underlying doctrine of the duality of mind. The student of the Egyptian teaching is tempted to smile when they read and hear of these many new theories regarding the duality of mind. The student of the Egyptian teaching is tempted to smile when they read and hear of these many new theories regarding the duality of mind, each school adhering tenaciously to its own pet theories of a God and devil, both with power over the mind of humans, which then in fact give you a third mind, the trinity of minds, and each claiming to have discovered the truth. The student turns back the pages of occult history and back away in the dim beginnings of occult teachings. He finds references to the ancient Egyptian doctrine of the doctrine of gender on the mental plane. The manifestation of mental gender, and examining further, they find that the ancient teaching took cognizance of the phenomenon of the dual mind and accounted for it by the teaching of mental gender. This idea of mental gender may be explained in a few words to students who are familiar with the modern teachings just alluded to. The masculine doctrine of mind corresponds to the so-called objective mind, conscious mind, voluntary mind, active mind, etc. And the feminine doctrine of mind corresponds to the so-called subjective mind, subconscious mind, involuntary mind, passive mind, etc. Of course, the Egyptian teachings do not agree with the many modern religious theories regarding the nature of the two phases of mind, nor does it agree with the many so-called facts claimed by the two respective aspects, some of the said theories and claims being very far-fetched and incapable of standing the test of experiment and demonstration. Do we need a God who is all-powerful, yet the devil has some of his power? When things go good, it's God. When things go bad for us, it's the devil. We Egyptians don't accept that as true or a reality. We point to the phrases of agreement merely for the purpose of helping the student to assimilate his previously acquired knowledge with the teachings of the Egyptian masters, the duality of mind. If you had taken the time and trouble to decipher a little of the mystic jargon of the Egyptian teachings, you might have received much right knowledge upon the subject of the dual mind or even the tri-mind. But then perhaps your most interesting work, the Bible, might not have been written. Let us now consider the Egyptian teachings regarding the mental gender. The Egyptian teachers impart their instruction regarding this subject by bidding their students examine the report of their consciousness regarding their self. The students are bidden to turn their attention inward upon the self dwelling within each. Each student is led to see that their consciousness gives them first a report of the existence of themselves. The report is, I am. Step 1. Then me, myself, and I. There is our true tri-mind and one being, you. While at first there seems to be only an I existing, a more careful and closer examination reveals the fact that there exists an I and a me. The me is the responding you, as in who, me? Not me. These mental twins differ in their characteristics and nature, and an examination of their nature and the phenomena arising from the same will throw much right knowledge upon many of the problems of mental influence. Then you have myself and in confirmed, I did it myself, which led to who, me? Yes, I did it myself. And then the third doctrine is I, as in I did it, or I am that I am, or I am who I am. Let's begin with a consideration of the me again, which is usually mistaken for the I by the student, until he presses the inquiry a little further back into the recesses of the consciousness. A mortal thinks of themselves and its aspect of me as being composed of certain feelings, tastes, likes, dislikes, habits, peculiar ties, characteristics, etc., all of which go to make up their personality or the self, known to themselves and others. They know that these emotions and feelings change, are born and die away, are subject to the doctrine of rhythm and the doctrine of polarity, which take him from one extreme of feeling to another. They also think of the me as being certain knowledge gathered together in their mind, and thus forming a part of themselves. This is the me of a mortal. But we have proceeded too hastily. The me of many humans may be said to consist largely of their consciousness of the body and their physical appetites, etc. Their consciousness being largely bound up with their bodily nature, they practically live there. Some humans even go so far as to regard their personal apparel as a part of their me, and actually seem to consider it a part of themselves. A writer has humorously said that humans consist of three parts: soul, body, and clothes. These clothes, conscious people, would lose their personality if divested of their clothing by savages upon the occasion of a shipwreck. But even many who are not so closely bound up with the idea of raiment stick closely to the consciousness of their bodies being their me and not their I. They cannot conceive a self independent of the body. Their mind seems to them to be practically a something belonging to their body, in which many cases it is indeed. But as human rises to the scale of consciousness, they're able to disentangle their me from their idea of body. and is able to think of their body as belonging to the mental part of them called I. But even then, they are very apt to identify the me entirely with the mental states, feelings, etc., which they feel to exist within. They are very apt to consider these internal states as identical within themselves, instead of their being simply things as myself, to yourself, to herself, onto themselves, things, not a thing, produced by some part of their mentality and existing within them, of them, and in them, but still not themselves. They see that they may change these internal states of feelings by an effort of will, and that they may produce a feeling or state of an exactly opposite nature. In the same way, and yet the same me exists. And so after a while, they are able to set aside these various mental states, emotions, feelings, habits, qualities, characteristics, and other personal mental belongings. They're able to set them aside, and that not me, not by myself, I did not do that collection of curiosities and encumbrances, as well as valuable possessions. This requires much mental concentration and power of mental analysis on the part of the student. But still, the task is possible for the advanced student, and even for those not so far advanced are able to see, in the imagination, how the process may be performed. Who are you? I am who I am. And just who is that? Me. Me who? Myself. That's who I am. After this laying aside process has been performed, the student will find themselves in a conscious possession of a nasuf, self, which may be considered in its I and me dual aspects. The me will be felt to be as something mental in which thoughts, ideas, emotions, feelings, and other mental states may be produced. It may be considered as the mental womb, as the ancients styled it, capable of generating mental offspring. It reports to the consciousness as a me, with latent powers of creation and generation of mental progeny of all sorts and kinds. Its powers of creative energy are felt to be enormous, but still it seems to be conscious that it must receive some form of energy from either its I companion or else from some other I it is able to bring into its mental creation. This consciousness brings with it a realization of an enormous capacity for mental work and creative ability.
All right. So, that's what happened with reading. You went in some stuff clear, precise, and hopefully y'all can perceive what was read. If not, when the editing comes, you can listen to it until you absorb it. I know you ain't finna do it, some of y'all, but at least I said my part. Listen to it over and also read along with it once you receive your sacred wisdom, etc. But tell how everybody's showing up. You can stay still and listen and attend with us. So we're gonna take it out with the all affirmation. With our brother Neb. How y'all feel about this one? Did y'all understand a lot of it, or a lot of it went over your head? At least y'all can get some of it, right?
Tell you,
So
understand a lot of it. Like it's
that's good.
Yeah, tell you.
See, the war within, how your mind creates me, myself, and I.
Yeah, it even touch base on the exercise we know we're supposed to be doing that you keep on, leaning on us.
Exactly. I keep you're gonna get it. Y'all gonna learn today.
Yeah, the breathing exercise to touch base on the whole scenario. I was like, wow, look at this.
That's all I'm just saying to y'all. Like, let's go. Let's do it. I'm glad y'all get that. Verification from the master teacher himself, Thunderclapper himself, Thunderbird.
Yeah.
So, all right, family. Till next time, we'll meet again. For Amana, Fiddle Shat, What do?
Umani.
Umani ni pia ushet.
Very sad.
Here's that.